So we're talking about two cities, Washington and London. But really, we're talking about two completely different ideas for how the world's economy should run. First, you have the Washington Consensus, this economic playbook that really dominated everything for decades. And now, there's a new challenger on the block, the London Consensus. Understanding the shift between these two is absolutely critical, especially when you realize just how much one of them completely reshaped India's entire destiny.
And that really brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did one single idea, born in Washington, D.C., become the spark for India's massive 1991 reforms? And, maybe just as important, now that this old idea is kind of fading away, what's coming next? Because believe me, the answer to that question is going to define India's economic future for a long, long time.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to break down the Washington Consensus. What problem was it trying to solve, and what was the powerful medicine it prescribed? We'll even get into its famous 10 commandments. Then we'll give it a report card, see how it actually performed, especially in India. After that, we'll meet its successor, the London Consensus, and put them side by side in a showdown before we wrap it all up with the key takeaways for India's future. Let's get into it. To really get why the Washington Consensus even came to be, you've got to travel back in time with me to the 1980s. It was a period of total economic chaos for a lot of the world. All across Latin America, countries were literally drowning in debt. Inflation was spinning out of control, and with the whole Soviet model collapsing, there was this huge ideological vacuum. The world was just desperate for answers, for some kind of new economic rulebook. And well into that chaos stepped the Washington Consensus. Now, the term itself was coined back in 1990 by an economist named John Williamson, but this was way more than just one guy's theory. It was really a powerful package of 10 core policies, and it was backed by the three most powerful economic institutions on the planet, all conveniently based in Washington. We're talking the IMF, the World Bank, and the U.S. Treasury. Their goal was pretty clear: rescue and stabilize all these struggling economies. And at the very heart of the consensus was this one big, powerful ideology: neoliberalism. It's a philosophy built on a really simple, almost pure faith that free markets, if you just leave them alone with as little government interference as possible, are the ultimate unstoppable engine for growth. The core belief was that this was a universal truth. What worked for the West would work for absolutely everyone. So, what was actually in this neoliberal recipe? Well, Williamson laid out 10 very specific policies, and they quickly became known as the 10 Commandments. And let's be clear, these weren't just some friendly suggestions. They were presented as a universal, one-size-fits-all prescription for economic health, and often they were a non-negotiable requirement for any country looking for a financial lifeline. Okay, so trying to memorize all 10 of these points, especially for an exam, can be a real pain. So let's make it easy. We can group all 10 commandments into three simple, logical pillars. Pillar 1 is all about fixing the government's wallet. Pillar 2 is about opening the economy's doors. And Pillar 3 is unleashing private power. Let's break each of those down. So that first pillar, fixing the government's wallet, was really all about fiscal responsibility. It meant strict fiscal discipline, which basically means stop spending more money than you're making. It also pushed for reorienting public spending, moving away from things like inefficient subsidies, and putting that money into long-term investments like health and education. And finally, it called for tax reform, making sure more people paid taxes, but keeping the rates moderate. All right, next up, Pillar 2, opening the economy's doors. This was globalization in its purest form. It meant financial liberalization, letting the markets themselves set interest rates. It meant keeping a competitive exchange rate so your exports would be attractive to other countries. And, maybe most importantly, it meant throwing the doors wide open to global trade by slashing tariffs and rolling out the welcome mat for foreign direct investment, what we all know as FDI. And that brings us to the final pillar, unleash private power, which honestly gets to the very soul of this market-first ideology. This was all about privatizing those big, clunky, state-owned companies, deregulating entire industries to spark some real competition, and, this is crucial, guaranteeing secure property rights, which gives investors the confidence they need to actually put their money to work. So, the billion-dollar question: did it actually work? Well, the legacy of the Washington Consensus is complicated. It's a story with some really remarkable successes, for sure, but also one with some very harsh criticisms and a lot of social pain along the way. It is definitely not a simple pass or fail situation.
And this brings us right back home. You see, for India, the Washington Consensus wasn't just some abstract theory in a textbook, it was the actual blueprint for our historic 1991 reforms. India was facing a massive balance of payments crisis, and so we adopted many of these principles: liberalization, privatization, globalization. And you know what? That move is widely credited with stabilizing our economy and kicking off an incredible period of high growth. But on the other hand, the criticism was absolutely fierce, and it really honed in on one massive flaw: this one-size-fits-all approach. The consensus just completely ignored local context, the unique histories, the cultures, the institutions that make every nation different. And forcing this rigid, cookie-cutter formula on everyone often came at a really high social cost. We saw rising unemployment, skyrocketing inequality, and the dismantling of social safety nets that people depended on. The dominance of the Washington Consensus really started to fall apart right around the turn of the century. First, the Asian financial crisis in 97 and 98 showed just how dangerous unregulated flows of money could be. Then came the 2008 global financial crisis, and that was like a death blow. It shattered the core belief that markets could just regulate themselves. And all the while, you had the incredible state-led rise of China, which showed the world a powerful alternative. By May 2023, the whole conversation had shifted, with top scholars gathering to officially draft a new way forward. Which brings us to today, and the birth of a new idea: the London Consensus. Now, let's be super clear here. This isn't just like a simple software update to the old system. No. This is a fundamental rethinking of economics, one that's built from the ground up to tackle with defining challenges of our time. We're talking climate change, AI, populism, and that stubborn, persistent inequality. So instead of 10 rigid commandments, the London Consensus is built on 5 flexible principles. And even the language they use signals a massive shift. The focus is now on well-being, not just raw GDP numbers. Growth has to be inclusive, creating jobs for everyone. Economies need to be resilient so they can handle shocks. And this is huge. It puts politics and state capacity right at the front and center. The government is no longer seen as the enemy of the market, but as its essential partner. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. This is where the differences just pop right out. Let's put these two economic philosophies head to head and see exactly where they agree and, more importantly, where they really part ways. I mean, just at the highest level, the difference is night and day. The Washington Consensus was built on the idea that markets always know best, and it offered a rigid prescription to achieve stability. The London Consensus, on the other hand, argues that context is everything. It offers guiding principles, not strict rules, to achieve a much, much broader goal: inclusive growth and the well-being of society as a whole. And when you really dig into the details on this, the philosophical shift is just profound. Washington basically treated the state like an obstacle that needed to be minimized. Just get out of the way. London sees the state as an essential partner, an enabler, an insurer. For Washington, the primary goal was always GDP growth. For London, it's citizen well-being. And maybe the biggest change of all, Washington saw politics as this messy annoyance, getting in the way, while London sees a stable political foundation as the absolute prerequisite for any kind of success. So what's the bottom line here? Let's bring this all home. What does this huge ideological battle really mean for India? Why should a student in Delhi or a policymaker in Mumbai care about a debate that started in Washington and London? Well, because the implications for us are absolutely massive. Okay, for all of you exam aspirants, this is the slide to screenshot. Here's what you really need to remember. First, India's 1991 reforms, they are a direct product of the Washington Consensus. Second, the new focus on state capacity, that speaks directly to one of India's biggest ongoing challenges, which is building strong, effective institutions. Third, the new goal of inclusive growth, that lines up perfectly with India's own policy ambitions today. And maybe the most important point of all, this new emphasis on policy flexibility creates a massive opportunity for India to stop just importing models and to start designing solutions that are tailor-made for our own unique context. So, you see, the decline of one global consensus and the rise of another isn't just some academic debate for economists. It's an opportunity. It opens a door. It frees us up to ask the most important question of all. As India moves forward, beyond ideas from Washington or London, what should our very own Indian consensus for development actually look like? Answering that, well, that's the defining challenge for the next generation.